Welcome to a new day of truth and awakening, and thank you all for tuning in to the first edition of the original histories of Africa and migrations of the ancient world. I am your King and Royal Majesty, Pharaoh Mitzrayim, the ancient historian, historical researcher, geographer, and the voice of truth. And today I will be teaching on the subject, Black Egyptians in the eyes of Herodotus. But before we get started, be sure to look below, subscribe to this channel, and like and share this video. Thank you. Herodotus, an ancient Greek historian who visited Egypt in the year 450 BCE, some 2,500 years ago, saw the Egyptians with his own eyes. And in his books titled The Histories, he describes the hair texture and skin color of the ancient Egyptians. But the most significant thing about this passage from Herodotus is it is the earliest, most ancient, most realistic historical source to give a detailed physical description of a nation of people. And that, in my eyes, says a lot. But some of you may ask, why is this important? It is important because it helps us identify who the Egyptians were and how did they look. But later scholars and translators, due to the rise of racism and white supremacy, changed the true meaning of the words used by Herodotus to describe the race of the Egyptians. But here in this video, I'm going to post and read the source, and we are going to analyze, examine, and find out the true meaning of the original Greek words used by Herodotus to describe the race of the ancient Egyptians. So without further ado, let's show the source and reveal the truth once and for all. No more waiting for the truth. Let us now begin our lesson and allow the ancients to speak. And the first source I'm going to read is Herodotus, The Histories, Book 2, Chapter 104, 450 BCE, translated by George Rawlinson, published in 1858, and it says, in quotes, "There can be no doubt that the Kochians are an Egyptian race. My own conjectures were founded first on the fact that they are black-skinned and have woolly hair." As we just read, George Rawlinson, without hesitation, but with all certainty, translated Herodotus' words as black-skinned and woolly-haired when describing the race of the ancient Egyptians. And this was a settled and established fact by Mr. George Rawlinson. And on this, we conclude. Now, let us go to our next source, which is another translation of Herodotus that was written and published some 32 years after George Rawlinson's translation of Herodotus. And here, in Herodotus, The Histories, Book 2, Chapter 104, 450 BCE, translated by G.C. Macaulay, published in 1890, says, in quotes, "For the people of Colchis are evidently Egyptian. That this was so I conjectured myself, not only because they are dark-skinned and have curly hair." Based on the passage we just read, there was certainly a disagreement between the translators G.C. Macaulay and George Rawlinson, as G.C. Macaulay, when writing the histories of Herodotus, came to his own conclusion and translated Herodotus' words as dark-skinned and curly-haired when describing the race of the Egyptians, rather than black-skinned and woolly-haired as stated by George Rawlinson. And since we have this disagreement between the translators, there's only one solution to solving this problem. And the solution is, what were the original Greek words used by Herodotus to describe the skin color and hair texture of the Egyptians, and the true meaning of them? That we shall find out now. After reading and searching through the original Greek text of Herodotus' The Histories, we find out that the Greek words used by Herodotus to describe the skin color and hair texture of the Egyptians were melancholy and allotrichis. Melancholy meaning black skin according to George Rawlinson, and dark skin according to G.C. Macaulay, and allotrichis meaning woolly haired according to George Rawlinson, and curly haired according to G.C. Macaulay. But let us focus on this word melancholy and break it up into two words, mela and croy. Mela meaning black according to Rawlinson, and dark according to Macaulay, and croy meaning skin. And when we go to the Strong's Concordance Bible Dictionary, we find out that the definition for this word, melas or mela, 3189, simply means black. So the question is, do G.C. Macaulay translate this word melas in other chapters of his translation of Herodotus? And the answer is yes, and that we shall find out. Pay attention to the original Greek text written in parentheses as we go to Herodotus the Histories, Book 2, Chapter 232, 450 BCE, translated by G.C. Macaulay, published in 1890, and it says, in quote, "There came upon them small men of less stature. After passing through these, they, the Nasamunes, came to a city in which all the men were in size like those who carried them off, and in color of skin black. And by the city ran a great river, which ran from the west towards the sun rising." So now we see, in G.C. Macaulay's own translation of Herodotus, the word melas is translated as black instead of dark, when Herodotus is speaking on a race of short men living on the banks of the Niger River in West Africa. But let us continue. Pay close attention and focus on the Greek word written in parentheses as we go to our next source, Herodotus the Histories, Book 2, Chapter 57, 450 BCE, translated by G.C. Macaulay, published in 1890, and it says, in quote, "And in saying that the dove was black, they indicated that the woman was Egyptian." Again, as we just found out, G.C. Macaulay, in his translation of Herodotus the Histories, translates the word melas as black instead of dark, when Herodotus is describing an Egyptian female priestess from Thebes in southern Egypt. I smell contradiction, do you? But let us continue. Again, focus on the original Greek text as we go to Herodotus the Histories, Book 2, Chapter 222, 450 BCE, translated by G.C. Macaulay, published in 1890, and it says, in quotes, "Alleging as it does that the Nile flows from melting snow, whereas it flows out of Libya through the midst of the Ethiopians, and so comes out into Egypt. The third evidence is afforded by the people dwelling there, who are of a black color by reason of the burning heat." G.C. Macaulay once again translates this word melas as black when Herodotus is describing the skin color of the native Egyptians living along the Nile River and the native Ethiopians south of Egypt and south of the Sahara Desert in Libya. But let us continue. As we conclude on this topic, pay attention to the original Greek text written in parentheses as we go back to the passage written in Herodotus the Histories, Book 2, Chapter 104, 450 BCE, translated by G.C. Macaulay, published in 1890, and it says, in quote, "For the people of Colchis are evidently Egyptian. That this was so I conjectured myself, not only because they are dark-skinned and have curly hair." Wow. As we just saw with our own eyes and heard with our own ears, G.C. Macaulay and other chapters of his translations of Herodotus admitted that this word melas meant black. But only when it came to the Egyptians, the meaning changes from black to dark. I find that strange. So now we know that G.C. Macaulay knew all along that this word Melos meant black, but instead of telling the truth, he commits forgery and creates confusion. But although G.C. Macaulay translates this word as dark, we now know for sure that dark means black, as in black, because the word Melos only means black. But let us continue and focus briefly on this other word, aloe, which was translated as curly-haired by G.C. Macaulay in Herodotus, Book 2, Chapter 104. But G.C. Macaulay, in another chapter, again translates this very same word. And let us see what he has to say as we go to Herodotus the Histories, Book 7, Chapter 70, 450 B.C.E., translated by G.C. Macaulay, published in 1890. And it says, in quote, "For the Ethiopians from the east are straight hair, but those of Libya have hair more thick and woolly than that of any other man." Again, as we just witnessed, G.C. Macaulay contradicts himself and gives two different meanings for the exact same word. In the earlier book, Book 2, Macaulay translates this word aloes as curly-haired when it is referring to the Egyptians. But in a later book, Book 7, the meaning changes, and Macaulay translates this same word as woolly-haired when it is referring to the Ethiopians. But it is the exact same word with one single meaning. And as we just witnessed, Macaulay later on in Book 7 admitted that this word aloe simply means woolly-haired. And on this, we conclude this lesson. Thanks to Herodotus' physical description on the race of the ancient Egyptians, we can now identify and pinpoint who the Egyptians were on ancient Egyptian wall art and tomb images such as this. And based on what Herodotus said, the blackest and darkest people shown on the tomb art represents the true Egyptians. And we can say for certain that these two images here represents the true race of the ancient Egyptians. And here on this image, we have the Egyptians, who are of a very dark reddish brown complexion and dark enough to be called black, wearing a white linen kilt with very little facial hair and dwelling along the Nile River. And here we have the Ethiopian or the Cushite, who are black like the Egyptians, but extremely black, and they also wear a white linen kilt, have very little facial hair, and dwell along the Nile River south of Egypt. But these two nations here do not represent the race of the ancient Egyptians. And here we have the Asiatics on the bottom and the Tamahu on the top. And neither are black like the Egyptians, but are much lighter skinned than the Egyptians. And both are wearing multicolored garments that is different from the Egyptians. And both have full beards and lots of facial hair, unlike the Egyptians. And neither one dwells along the Nile River near the Egyptians, but they can be seen as an entirely distinguished race from that of the ancient Egyptians, having absolutely no similarities and no kinship whatsoever to the ancient Egyptians. But it is also important to know that the Asiatic races of the Middle East mentioned by Herodotus, such as the Persians, Assyrians, Arabians, Phoenicians, and Syrians of Palestine, were never called black. And if these Asiatics were seen as the same race as the ancient Egyptians, then they also would have been called black. But they were not. But only the Egyptians and the Ethiopians were called black. And they were what we call today truly black African. And if you're not black, you're not Egyptian. And going back to this word Melos proves that the blackness of the Egyptians stood out to the rest of mankind. Because this word Melos, which means black, is the opposite extreme of the Greek word leukos, which means white. And the Ethiopians and Egyptians
were not seen as in between black and white, but were seen as the opposite of white, as in extremely black, thus proving that the Egyptians were seen as the blackest people of all mankind, and the blackness of the Egyptians can no longer be denied. And on this, I conclude.
So there you have it. What did we learn today? We learned that the original Greek word melos simply means black, and the word aloe or allotrichis simply means woolly haired. And we also learned that the later translators of Herodotus, who translated melos as dark instead of black and allotrichis as curly-haired instead of woolly-haired when describing the race of the Egyptians, contradicted themselves and by their own errors and mistakes admitted in other chapters that melos means black and allotrichis means woolly-haired. And lastly, that word melos proves that the blackness of the Egyptians stood out to the rest of mankind, and the Egyptians were seen as the blackest people on earth because melos is the opposite of leukos, which means white. And the Asiatic races of Asia in the Middle East, such as the Persians, the Assyrians, the Arabians, and the Phoenicians, were never called black by Herodotus and were seen as distinguished from the black Egyptians. But the Egyptians and the Ethiopians were seen as one and the same race because both were called black skin and woolly hair, thus proving if you're not black, you're not Egyptian. And in order to be Egyptian, you have to be black. And with that said, I say no more. The sources have been shown. The ancients have spoken. The lies have been exposed and refuted. And the truth has been revealed. I arrest my case. This is your brother Pharaoh Mitzrayim signing out, saying until next time, Egypt stays in Africa. Peace, Ma'at, Amen, Hotep, and may you all have a wonderful day.